based here in metropolitan DC. She's working as a photographer, filmmaker, and public speaker. So without further ado, please welcome Amanda Luciano.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. Adjust the sun a little shorter. Does that sound okay? All right. So I always love the Q&A part better than the presentation. So I want to leave as much time as we can ask as many questions as you want. But I'll start with the most popular questions that I get. How did you get a job like that? And to be honest, I'm still pinching myself that it actually happened. I was working in Washington, D.C. as a freelance photographer after working for many years as a newspaper photographer. Before this, I lived in California and worked for a newspaper for about 6 years. And when the newspaper industry was in decline, I took a leap of faith and, if I didn't move, I probably would have ended up being laid off. So I decided to target areas that were rich with news. Washington, D.C. was obviously one of them. But what I failed to consider was D.C. was actually a really competitive market. So it took me a while to break in once I got here. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have press credentials. And it was the first inauguration of President Barack Obama. But I really wanted to be there. So I got up early, probably like most of you, and got on the bus and had my hand warmers in my pocket and my snacks packed. And, for me, it was just an amazing day. It was, even though it was so cold, it was such a warm experience. And for the first time, I felt like I made the right decision to move to DC and to start over. And I'd like to tell you that I got the call the very next day to work for President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama. That probably helps, right? There we go. Is that better? Yes. Okay. So now that I've done these speaking events for a while, I always know that there's one thing that happens. Like there's going to be something that happens, and maybe the microphone won't be on, or the screen won't work, and most of the time it's just rolling with it, just saying, oh, well, this is the thing that's going to happen, and I'm just going to keep moving on. So anyhow, I was so excited to be able to cover the inauguration, and it was the first day that I felt really, really high, like really that I made the right decision. And I was leaving the National Mall, and I tried to call my father to share this experience. And I wasn't able to get him because, the phones were locked because everyone was making their own calls to their families. And unfortunately, he passed away the next morning unexpectedly. So the interesting thing was the last conversation I had with him was about the president. And he was also, we never talked about politics, but he was also really, really compelled by this first family. And he thought, the country was changing and for the better. And so, when I got the call a couple years later from Pete Souza, surprisingly asking me if I wanted to apply to be a White House photographer, I thought, well, maybe there's something that my father knew all along. Working in the White House is just an amazing place, full of history. I never stopped being grateful for that. One of my favorite things to do was to walk from the lower cross hall up to the East Room, and if on the marble staircase. And if you walked on the inside, you could actually feel the grooves in the staircase. And I like to just slowly ascend the stairs and think about all of the people who walked in those steps before me. And being at a place like Howard University, I'm sure you have those thoughts walking around this very campus. So another question I always get is, what's your favorite photo? And that's kind of, for me, it all depends on the day. So instead of telling you about my favorite photo, I wanted to tell you about the kind of pictures that I like to make. This picture I took, probably my first maybe
five months of being there. And as an artist walking into a place like the White House, you can imagine it's so structured. It's such a structured environment, you know. I mean, like, you have to go through Secret Service to get in the gates. You know, there's motorcades, like a long line of black cars. Then you have to know which car you're supposed to get into. I mean, there's a lot of guys walking around with guns and earpieces, and you're like, you know, hey, I'm good, you know. So there's like a lot of things you just have to get used to before you can even start to make creative pictures. So I would say that it probably took me about 6 months before I felt like I could make more creative pictures. And this was one of the first pictures that I took that, you know, really, I felt like it showed another side of Mrs. Obama. You know, I'm a dog lover too. I have a dog, and just we were in the room, and she was set up to do a video message, and I was there just to document it, because that's what I did. I documented the official events of the First Lady for history, and so I was there for a lot of these moments. And so, you know, Bo was ready to sit up and do the video message on cue, like he always was. But Sunny was a younger dog, and she always just had her own ideas, and so she wasn't paying attention, and Mrs. Obama just started cracking up, and you know, I just loved making this frame. Anytime I have a bad day, I just look at this picture. I mean, like, look at this girl's eyes. I mean, and that big blue bow. I mean, you know, it would be easy for me as a photographer to always just focus on Mrs. Obama, on her face. You know, she's so radiant and so beautiful, but I think that you would miss all of these moments. These are the moments of people reacting to her, to seeing her for the first time. And I remember when I met her for the first time. I mean, my eyes were just as big as this girl's. I was like, oh my gosh, that's the First Lady. I'm smiling so big. I can't even see out of my eyes. You're so tall. You're so much taller, you know, than I thought you were. And so, you know, having my own reaction to meeting the First Lady, one, it taught me that if I wanted to do my job effectively, that I'd have to ground myself. Because otherwise, if you get swept up in that emotion all the time, I'm not going to be able to take good pictures, right? So it taught me that, but then it also taught me about how people react to her, because I had that same experience, and then being able to capture that in a moment, because it happens in just a few seconds, right? And how many of you have seen her come to campus, or President Obama come to campus? Yeah? I mean, it's just like even seeing the motorcade. I remember the first time, like, when I lived in D.C., I was waving at the motorcade. And then a few years later, I'm in the motorcade. And then people are waving at me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, how did this happen? Well, they weren't really waving at me. So I like to take pictures that are always looking at the reactions to her. And I like pictures with an element of surprise. You know, this was part of a garden program we did. Mrs. Obama visited innovative gardens throughout the country at schools. And so this was a rooftop garden in New Jersey. And, you know, we were on the plane coming in, and there was a rainstorm, and you know, we're just hoping that we could go to this event. And, you know, just like it always did, we landed the plane, and the clouds parted and the sun came out, and, you know, and we were able to participate in this event. And the girls here on the rooftop garden, they were showing her how to compost, and they had offered her, you know, a pair of gloves. And Mrs. Obama said, "Oh, I don't mind getting my hands dirty." So as they were showing them the composting from bucket to bucket, she saw a worm and just lifted it right up to her eyes. And just at the same time, like a gust of wind came and picked all the girls' hairs up, and so it was just a fun moment to be able to document. I love all the laughter. Yeah, so there are so many times that we photographed President Obama and Mrs. Obama behind a podium. And for me, when I was creating the edit of this book, I didn't want any of the pictures in there to feel official, right? So this is the only one where she's speaking at a podium, and it's because she, you know, there's there's also an element of surprise. She took her shoes off and her toenail polish is blue. It's something that I didn't expect, and I was, that's the thing is, like, as an artist, is always looking for, you're looking for something special in those ordinary moments. I tell photographers who have to go to, school assignments or cover the same parade every year. It's like, just really challenge yourself to look for that one thing that's different, and if you can stick in there, like, you can really do that anywhere. So I was using my skills as a newspaper photographer to be able to, just stay in there and find these little moments. Again, I think a picture, can share so much. It's like the layers of information in a photo. These girls, we visited in their home countries of Liberia and Morocco, and as part of the Let Girls Learn initiative, which draws light on the fact that 62 million girls in the world don't have the opportunity to get an education. So we visited these girls in their home countries, and Mrs. Obama, because it was part of a documentary on global girls' education. And so once the film was complete, a few months later, they invited all the girls to come to the White House to screen the film. And so it was just amazing because, these girls in Liberia, they had never been out of their own town, let alone their own country, and then on a plane to be welcomed at the White House by Mrs. Obama, right? I mean, they were just squealing as they were coming in the door, taking selfies everywhere. I mean, they're so excited to be there. And then you can just see the different reactions on people's faces. And one thing that I didn't notice until I started the book tour was the woman in the corner in the red dress. She's the only one that's not looking at Mrs. Obama. And I was like, she's looking at the students because she's a teacher. And what you see on her face is pride. And so I think that's, because even though I took the picture, sometimes you still discover these little things. So that's the fun part. Yeah, so I think the other thing is that photos are, a bridge. They create connection. When you look at this picture, what do you feel? What do you feel? What's that? Intimacy. What else do you feel? Warmth. Love. History. But you're still looking, right? Anything else? Yeah. 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 And that's just the wonderful thing about photography is it creates these connections. And so if you, for a moment, forget that you know who they are, forget that and put yourself in the photo or put someone else in your family in the photo. It's like, that's how we all want to feel when we're in love. And I think that's the really the powerful thing about images. So the backstory behind this photo is, again, there was a video team there setting up for to do a public like a video message. It was for the World Expo. And so they had 3 different segments they were going to shoot from 3 different directions. And so while they were resetting their cameras, nobody was paying attention to them. And she just leaned into him really quickly. And the moment only lasted a few seconds. I barely had enough time to get my camera up. And I think I made 1 or 2 frames. And for me, usually as a photographer, I'm looking for a really nice, clean composition. And for me, at first, this one was like, oh, it's such a wonderful moment. But the background's a little messy. And, there's a light stand back there. And they're kind of off on the side of the frame. And then my editor was like, you're crazy. This is a great picture. And I think that's so important to be, still to working with a team. And I'm still learning too, so being able to have that guide and a mentor and, the editor to make sure that I knew that this was a great photo. So as a White House photographer, I know that you have unique access. So probably many of you have seen what this photo looks like on the other side. This is the Kennedy Center Honors. They attended once a year, and Mrs. Obama and President Obama attended together. And the press would be on the other side, on the ground, looking up and photographing. But I was in the presidential box, and there was only me and another staff member there, and the Secret Service agent that's holding the door. So, I had enough to get just a few frames before he closed the door, because he doesn't care whether I get my pictures or not. And I don't blame him. His job is so important. So the interesting thing about this photo is, on this night, Mrs. Obama went to the Kennedy Center by herself, because it was the night of the San Bernardino terrorist attacks. And President Obama stayed behind at the Oval Office to give a statement. And so for me, this was really an image that showed, how I feel about her and how most of the world feels about her, that she is a beacon of hope, and that, she is a symbol of resilience. And, for her being there that night, just felt like she was telling everybody we must go on. I got to travel to 20 countries in 4 years. I like to take these kind of photos because it shifts the scale, right? You think about like the president and the first lady, and then, seeing her walking onto the plane, just something that just sort of shifts the scale. And, in the book, there's also some images of her working with her team on the plane, and we see so many pictures of President Obama working with his team, and I thought that would be interesting to show that as well. This is at the World Expo in Milan. We went there and we were doing a tour of the building, and this is a room called the Mirror Room for obvious reasons. What you don't see is that, there's a room full of mirrors, and then there's a projector back here, and the scene is constantly changing. So maybe about every 8 seconds, a new photo is being projected and reflected on these mirrors. So my challenge as a photographer is, how do you disappear in a room full of mirrors? Right? Because you don't see me in there, right? So, and a lot of times the challenge is you're going through these spaces really quickly. So it's not like I get to go in and work it out, and then they come in. I'm just, mostly moving with them. And so, all this troubleshooting's happening in real time. And so I'm like, okay, find a crack in the mirror, right? Where everything gets a little smaller. And then I turn sideways, tuck my arms in, make myself as small as possible, and think thin thoughts. And somehow it worked. So that was a fun photo to make, and I like it because it's visually interesting. So it was probably about almost a year before I went on my first international trip, and I was so nervous because I wanted to do a good job, and I was the only official photographer traveling. And like I said, I got to go to 20 countries in 4 years, and countless American cities. And growing up, I have 9 brothers and sisters. So it was like growing up outside of Philadelphia with 9 brothers and sisters. I had seen places like this in a magazine or, on the Chinese restaurant wall, what that looked like. But to think that I'd actually ever be on the Great Wall of China was just an amazing experience. And then to see that's Mrs. Obama and her daughters, I was like, someone please pinching me. I can't believe that this is happening. But the story behind this picture is that they were looking at the wall, so their backs were turned towards me, or turned away from me, and they were looking at the wall. And then Mrs. Obama turned back and just said, would you mind taking a picture of me and my daughters? And so I lifted up my camera and took 2 pictures, and then put my camera down. And just right after that, she grabbed them, took her arms and grabbed them in for a big hug. And I lifted my camera back up and took another few pictures. And I love this one much better than the pose pictures. And I know she always loved the candid photos too. So the coolest thing was several weeks later, I was in the Oval Office and covering President Obama, and I looked behind his desk, and behind the Resolute desk, it was a framed photo, this photo, and I was like, didn't see anything. It was a really, really neat experience. So this is Cambodia, Angkor Wat. Such an amazing place. You know, a lot of times we were traveling through these spaces so quickly, and so I'm like, you know, looking around like, oh my gosh, this is absolutely incredible. Okay, do your job, you know, don't trip, you know, run ahead, because Mrs. Obama's like, I'm 5'4", and even when she's walking, I'm running because I'm short. And I always have to be ahead of her, right? So yeah, a lot of times you're just trying to absorb as much as you can, but then making sure that I'm always there and I'm not missing any moments. And so this was, you know, just such a special experience to be in this place. You know, a lot of times people ask me, you know, what was she thinking in this photo? And the truth is, I have no idea. I don't know what she was thinking, but I was thinking that I'm incredibly blessed to be having this opportunity to be here in such an amazing place, you know, so rich with history and culture and so much older than we are. Let girls learn. So I told you a little bit about this earlier with the 62 million girls that don't have the opportunity to get an education. We traveled to Liberia, and we arrived in a storm, and we had to drive 45 minutes on washed away roads to get to this school. And when we arrived, you know, it was dark because of the storm, and then the school didn't have electricity to begin with, so it was very, very dark in this classroom. There's only an exposed cinder block wall you can see on this side here. There's a dirt floor. The girls didn't have very many books, but they were so proud to be there. They shared their stories about the obstacles they have to overcome to get an education. Some of these girls have to walk several hours to get to school, sometimes through dangerous conditions. And then they walk back, and then they help their family with their chores and the housework, and most times they're studying by candlelight. And they get up and they do it over again. So they were so impressed to meet Mrs. Obama, but we were so impressed to be in their presence because of their dedication and their resilience. And so when I had the opportunity to make a book, the editor said, "What kind of book do you want to make?" And I said, "I don't want to make a heavy coffee table book. I want to make a book that you can stick in a backpack, that you can carry for several hours, you know, because it was these girls that I had in mind. You know, I wanted it to be at a price point that was affordable. I wanted the book to be accessible, and if people couldn't afford the book still, I wanted them to be able to get it in public libraries, which is why I did my tour of public libraries. And so that was really important to me that I drew on that inspiration. My other inspirations turn around arts. Mrs. Obama started this program that goes into the lowest performing schools in the country and shows that if you integrate arts into the curriculum, not just an art class, but all day long, that you can actually turn around a school. It's been proven to work. They started with, you know, a handful of schools and then study those schools, and it's worked in every area of the school. So these kids were invited to the White House to perform at a luncheon next door. This is the map room, and they were invited to perform in the DIP room, diplomatic reception room. And they performed a poem by the girl in the pink bow about not letting your circumstances define you and not judging a book by its cover. And Mrs. Obama was so impressed with their performance that when she left, the kids were back in the map room, and they were waiting to be escorted out of the White House. They didn't know that they were going to meet her. But she said, I want to go and I want to surprise them. Where are they at? And so I heard this, and I just slipped in the door just a few seconds before her. And then, you know, right after me, she came and said something like, "Hey, everybody!" And they all you can see they all just lost their minds. I mean, it's like such pure joy. Like, I love the expression of the boy with the blue tie. And so, is that being there for that moment, because it's like, that happens and it's like a few seconds, and then there's the calm that happens. But for me also, in making this book, I wanted to make sure that I was giving back too, because these kids got invited to the White House to perform at something called the White House Talent Show every year, and the students from across the country who are part of Turnaround Arts would go there, and their job was to perform on stage in front of the First Lady at the White House. Like, no pressure, right? I mean, these kids are in middle school, elementary school, and so I just always thought it was so wonderful to see that the kids, were not quite confident when they took the stage, but they knew there was just like a flicker of light in them, and then they got on stage and they were in front of Mrs. Obama, and they were feeling the energy of the crowd, and they were being supported, and it was almost like you were, just watching this like flower bloom, and it was just such an amazing experience. And it's like, this was a time that I was always in tears behind my camera, because I'm like, this is such an incredible experience. And for me, that's what the arts did for me, it's like I said, I grew up with a lot of brothers and sisters. I grew up on welfare. I didn't have a lot of money or resources or opportunity. And to know that the gates of the White House opened for me, it was because of the arts. And I wanted to do what I could to support that. And so that's why I'm happy to say that a portion of the proceeds of the book goes to Turnaround Arts. And I'm now a Turnaround artist through the Kennedy Center, and I've been visiting all of these schools on the book tour, and I'm going to continue to do that work, because just like Howard University, it's so important to me that education is available for everybody. It should be equal for everyone, and I think that this is a program that is really working to improve that. So thank you. That's my presentation.
Just very briefly, that was a great presentation.
Oh, thank you.
And in my rush to bring Amanda up, we really didn't talk that much about the occasion in terms of Women's History Month. And for those, just brief history, I'm going to go through this real quick. Women's History Month was started by a group, it's, I believe, the Women's History Month Project. They lobbied Congress, I believe in 1987, got it, 1979, got it approved. Every year they pick a theme. This year's theme for Women's History Month is Nonetheless She Persisted. That, interestingly enough, was inspired by, of all people, Mitch McConnell, who, if you know the story about, I believe it was last year, when the current Attorney General they were having hearings on approving him. It was Elizabeth Warren who stood up and demanded that certain things be read into the record. The Senate majority was no, and basically told her, sit down and shut up. They even voted for her to shut up. And in Mitch McConnell's comments about her not being quiet, he said, and we told her and we voted, and still she persisted. All right, and I think that what I'm going to share with you was when I had told you, originally Amanda was supposed to be her Black History Month. The schedules didn't quite work. And then it's like, well, in March, I said, oh, okay, well, that's Women's History Month. That's even better. And then when I read what this year's theme was, still, nonetheless she persisted. I said, and I put it in my letter, I said, the stars lined up on this one because it really works. Not only because of Michelle Obama, and everyone here knows the kind of press she was getting from certain quadrants of the media. And it was so important that Amanda's book
really showed the inside of what was really going on in the White House and a lot of the positive things that she was doing, and how our First Lady persisted through all of that. She took the high road. And then, having heard Amanda's story about persistence, it also is well, let's put it this way. At Howard University, we know something about persistence. All right, we are in our 150th year, 151st year. So, and our motto is truth and service. But if we ever change that motto, I think it should be truth, service, and persistence. So, for the subject of your book and for your story, the whole story of persistence, I think, did it very well. So I'm very glad you did. Okay. So now at this part, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Josephine Durrani, who is professor in the Department of Political Science, and she'll be moderating the question and answer period.
Hello, everyone. Is it on? Yeah. Good evening, and thank you so much for coming out to join us for this wonderful presentation by Amanda. So I have been tasked with the easy part, which is just to stand here, point at you, and say, ask a question. So I would like to do that by saying that we have a microphone over here, and we would like you to line up or start lining up if you have a question that you would like to ask Amanda. Now, if anyone is not able to stand or come, you can raise your hand and I'll come to you during that time. So we'll start lining up, and simple rules. Please mention your name, your affiliation, and ask your question. Let's start. Affiliation.
Okay. My name is Sonia Woods. I'm an archivist in the Wollaston Art Research Center.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So I'll answer it in a couple different ways, because the first plane, the toy that I had, do you remember those Viewmasters, right? The orange, the Viewmasters, right? It wasn't a camera, but it was like, it was such a cool thing that you could just look into and change your space, right? And you press that little yellow lever, different place, you know. So that was my first, the exposure to like being able to change your scene. And sometimes that really helped me get away from some things that were happening at home. So it was maybe an escape too. But then later on, I think I was maybe 13 when I got my first camera. A family friend gave it to me. It was a Yashica camera. It was all manual. It had like a hippie strap on it, you know, a brown like hippie strap. And I just started taking pictures of everything. And I had a teacher who said, "You're really good at this. You should do this in, you know, high school and college." And I was like, "I am?" You know, because for me it was the first time I heard that I was good at something. And so so I just started to take all the courses that I could in photography. And then, you know, I got, you know, then there were always these voices that come into my head, like, you know, people say, "Oh, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I want to be a photographer, right? And they said, "Oh, well, yeah, that's cute, but what do you really want to be?" You know, like, "But how are you going to make money?" You know? And so it was these voices that, like, you know, I started to go on this path of photography, and then I sort of, like, you know, maybe lost the confidence and stepped aside, and then someone else would come in and say, "You're really good at this, you should do this." And so I kept being drawn back to the same thing. And you know, I went to Indiana University of Pennsylvania, which a state school for me. So I went to the school that I could afford, you know, that could get the most student in-state tuition. they didn't have a photojournalism program, but I went for journalism. And then as I started to, have a photography instructor, he was like, you should really pursue this as a career. And so they didn't have enough courses, so I started making them, creating courses. And then I did an articulation program where I went to the Art Institute of Philadelphia and took more courses. And then, coming out of school, like I didn't go to the school where, I didn't go to the photography school because the photography school was really expensive. So when I was fighting for the internships, I was going against the photography kids. And so the paid internships were going to them, and so I was just constantly this scrappy kid trying to come on, just someone let me in the door. And that's what I would do, is just get the toe in like a crack. Just give me a crack. And so that's what happened. I went to Allentown Morning Call and showed my portfolio, and they're like, hey kid, we gave away the paid internships, but if you want to do an unpaid internship, we'll take you on. And so I did. And so that was like the trajectory of my career. It was like, I filled in for someone who was on maternity leave, and I was like the third choice, but I worked harder and I worked extra hard. And then by the end, when they got to pick through those 3 people, they were like, well, you're the kid who's working hard, So I guess, even working at the White House, it was just this constant path of trying to work hard and prove myself and hoping that, well, I don't even know if I was hoping that somebody was noticed. And I was just assuming that they weren't. But I was doing what was important to me and what I loved. And so I guess that's how, my path had started. And I want to thank you for what you do, because it's so important. We had an archivist at the White House who was there for 27 years. Amazing, right? So she would keyword our pictures, she'd write our captions. So in history, in 50 years, in 500 years, people could search the captions in the same way. Because if 5 photographers were writing 5 different captions, it would be different, right? So this way, people could know how to use the archive. And if we didn't have, there's so many amazing pictures of this university, and, thank you for all that you do. And how did you get involved in play? Yeah. Oh, am I allowed to ask questions of you?
That was fantastic. So my mother's was not a career photographer, she's an amateur photographer, but she's the photographer of the family. In any family event, she would be the one taking pictures. But she was a teacher and a social worker. And she also assisted my father with his dental business, his dental office. But she was a teacher, so at any point in time, we would have, my sister and I have a younger sister, she would make us sit down and do workbooks, and books were our our first kind of toys. So I would play library. My sister, we would play all of our books.
Yeah.
We would create library cards.
Wow.
We would roll them around the house in the wagon, circulation. We would play that. But it never occurred to me, I'm going to be a librarian. I was a English teacher. I was in real estate. I was a bartender for a long time. But my sister continued all the way through with her education, from high school to college to her master's program to postdoc. She continued all the way on. But after bachelor's, I was like, I really just want to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
So I would come home, and we lived right beside each other, kind of. And so I'd take off my apron, my wait staff bartender apron, and she would go through my folders, what every bartender has. And she would see notes that I would be making, in my spare time, of outlines that I was devising on stuff that I wanted to research. I would just make outlines or notes or write questions to myself. I wonder how this happened. And she said, you need to go back to school. Yeah. And so I went back to school and got my master's, and I'm from North Carolina, so I'd never thought about PhD program. I never thought about any of that. But my master's program advisor said, and he knew my father, he said, your child needs to continue with her education. She's really smart, and she really could do a good job. And he had gone to Howard, so my dad said, I think you should, I'll pay for it. I'll pay whatever we'll start it out. So and I was 36 by this time. So I got to Howard, and one of my professors had a curriculum assignment where I had to come to Moreland Spingarn. You had to come to Moreland Spingarn to complete this assignment, and that was it. It's when I got to Moreland and did the assignment, it was like, okay, this is what I want
Right.
to do. I can do this.
Yeah.
So that's how that happened for me. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. And I think, that's the thing is for young people, for students, it's like you will notice that you're getting pulled in a certain direction, that your heart is beating a little faster for certain things. And it's like, and you might get diverted off your path, and that's okay. You have. It's natural, but just pay attention to when your heart beats a little faster, to when you get extra excited about something. And that's probably the thing that you're going to end up pursuing, or hopefully.
And if I can just abuse my role as a moderator, just to add on that, this is kind of an off-the-cuff discussion, turning the question around, but it's really important that you are telling us your experience. And I also, if you'd allow me to share, and I don't know if you remember this, last year I sent my students to the library and they met with her on a project which was to dig up all the past Howard faculty women who had been deans or in the professional capacity, and she helped them. She helped my students to dig up all the information, and I have it on posters which I use for the International Women's Day celebration. So your work is paying off. So we thank you for that. Thank you. Next question, please.
Good evening. My name is Marty Williams. I'm a photographer. I bought your book in December, towards the end of December. A few days later, I took your book to a friend's house to let her see it because she's a big fan of Michelle Obama. My friend would not let me leave her house until I gave her the book. So I had to give her the book, and then I had to go back and order a book for myself to keep. So I bought two books already.
You're a nice friend.
I just
Thank
have
you.
one question. As the photographer for Mrs. Obama, were you able to develop any type of personal rapport outside of photography? You were with her for the last 4 years.
Yeah.
Did you develop that kind of relationship, and have
Yeah.
you spoken with her since they've left office?
Yeah, I mean, she was an incredible role model for me. And I mean, the president's team is a little bit bigger when you travel. I covered the president too. So when you travel with him, it's like, I don't know, 50, 75 people, but with her it's like we're 12 people or so, maybe even fewer than that. So very much felt like a family. Everyone was looking out for each other. I remember the first time she said, "Hey Amanda, how's it going?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, you know my name, and you care how my day is going." This is, and so yeah. I mean, to spend so much time with her and to, not only just interact with her, but even being present in every event we went to. Is like sometimes she was there and she was speaking to a group like you, and maybe the message was for you, but what she was saying was really important in my life too, and that's the cool thing about being a photographer, is like my job is just to be completely and totally present. Like some of her staff members would have to manage her time, or security, or what's going to happen next. My job was not to do any of those things. I didn't have to worry about any of those things. My job was to be completely present and to listen to what she said and to make sure I was documenting those moments. And so being around her changed my life as a photographer, as a person. I mean, she really taught me about the life that I wanted to create for myself. And so she was very much a mentor and inspiration, the same as I would look at my own mother, and friends, and so even when I was traveling and pregnant, I would always have to be running, and the Secret Service got to a point where saying like, hey, we'll hold her in the car, just walk, and Mrs. Obama was like, hey, if you need like a break, let us know. So I think everybody always looked out for each other. And it very much felt like family to me. And one of the best days was to be able to bring my daughter there, only 2 weeks old. The last time I went into the White House, I got to introduce her to President Obama and Mrs. Obama. And to be in the room with my mom and Mrs. Obama and my daughter, and to realize these two incredibly influential women in my life, and what they taught me, and now what I get to pass that on to my own daughter. I mean, it still gives me chills, you know, to be able to have had that moment to express my gratitude. And so they'll always be a huge part of my life. So thank you.
Good evening.
Hi.
I'm Dinique Jordan. I'm an architecture major at Howard. And basically, I wanted to ask, like, you've done such a remarkable job.
Thank you.
And, you know, you finished this book and you've closed that chapter, but I feel like your chapter in accurately capturing historical events is not really over. And, you know, even now, the post-Obama era, we're in a moment of change. And I feel like everyone's taking, you know, photos all over, but your perspective, you've been closer to the truth than most. So your camera is tilted at a whole different angle. And I want to know, where do you feel that places you, or that calls you? Because it was just one step on the road, but it's the same road. Where do you think that calls you now? Do you feel placed or called in the moment in this change now? Yeah. And do you feel like this might just be something that's leading up to something greater for you?
Yeah, thank you. That's a wonderful question. So I guess to back up, what I didn't tell you at the start of the presentation is that, you know, as a photographer, my favorite thing to do was to work on, even as a newspaper photographer, long-term projects and stories. And the stories that always spoke to my heart were stories about discrimination and civil rights issues. And there were stories that I wanted to, about underserved communities. And I kept getting called to do that work. And right before I started at the White House, I worked on a series of films about same-sex couples impacted by the Defense of Marriage Act. And this was work that I was doing that no one was paying for me to do, or no one was promising to publish it. It was just, I moved to DC, and DC had legalized same-sex marriage. And so I thought this was, you know, consistent with my work and part of history, and I wanted to cover it. And so, you know, what started as a photo project then came into a video project, and then a film series, and then 4 years of work doing this, on this topic. And so when I got the call from Pete Souza, you know, asking if I wanted to apply to be a White House photographer, I was like, this sounds incredible, but like, I'm not a political photographer. Like, I don't even know if I'm the right person for the job. And it took me, you know, a few days to connect the dots. Like, to work for the first African-American first family is an incredible, I mean, I knew right away it was an incredible opportunity, but it was consistent with the work that I've been doing. And then, you know, to have what that means for next, it's like this turnaround arts, you know, this going into underserved schools and to equalizing opportunities, like to inspiring young people like myself that didn't come from a lot, that don't necessarily have someone recognizing the light inside themselves. For me to be able to be that person to other young people and say anything's possible, I never thought I would be here. You know, that's one thing that I've been so grateful for. But even, you know, with the March for Our Lives, is to hear the young woman from LA talk about educational justice. It's like, this is a framing of what I've been so passionate about, is like, if you have underserved communities and then they're going into schools and still underserved, it's like, how can we help that? How can I help that? And so that's something I'm very passionate about. My husband and his business partner are also filmmakers. They've been working on a film for the last several years about poverty and gun violence in Memphis. And so this summer we'll be doing a series of walks, community walks for 8 weeks. And it will be bringing artists to lead these walks and to create art leave-behind pieces voted on by the community. We're not just going to, you know, roll in there and just say, oh, here's art. You know, have it very much be a collaborative process to not only inspire young people, but also to introduce them to the mentors in their community. Because if you grow up in poverty, you know, you only know the 2 blocks right around you. You don't know there's an amazing person who lives 3 or 4 blocks over. And so by creating these community spaces and coming together, giving those opportunities for, to have that mentor in your life. Because, I mean, if someone didn't say that to me, you're a good photographer, you should pursue this. It's like, I don't know where I would be without those voices. And when people ask me, who helped you on your journey? It's not one hand or one footstep. It's like this thousands and thousands of people. That's what I loved about working with Mrs. Obama is she would always hug and say hi to everyone on the rope line, because she would say, you don't know what that experience means to that person. You don't know what saying a kind word or something encouraging to someone, you don't know what that means. You don't know what's happening in their day, and that's always worth taking time for. So I guess to answer your question, there's so many things that I'm still inspired by, and I kind of just maybe let the universe kind of guide me to those things, and that's what I feel especially compelled by is educational justice. Thank you.
Hi, Paul Hazel, and I work at Physical Facilities Management here on the campus. I want to say hi. I want to say that you have such a dancing romance with that camera and the subject, and such that it shows the admiration you have for Mrs. Obama. It shows. Clearly it does. I want to ask whether or not there is a subject that really you would not like to touch, such that you would not do it justice.
There was a subject that, sorry, can you answer
Yes,
that?
or maybe an incident or a subject or anything that you would really not like to
photograph?
Photograph.
Of her or in general?
No, in general.
Subject I wouldn't like to photograph. Well, I guess I always just, I wouldn't have worked for them if I didn't feel moved by them, right? It's like our heart only beats so many times. It's like, what's it worth beating for? I've never been the person that I'm going to go do this money because it's going to pay me a lot of money, or go and do this work because it's going to pay me a lot. It's like, that would be nice, but like I always feel like it's so important to do what you love, and they really inspired me, and the work that they were doing was consistent with what was important to me. So I wouldn't be able to do that job for someone else that didn't
I understand.
inspire me.
Okay. Thank you.
So yeah, I think it's choosing what you want to be around.
Okay.
But there were definitely hard moments to photograph. So there were some times where I felt like maybe I shouldn't be taking a picture. These were times after there's so many shootings that happened, and
Yes.
consoling families, or to go into a hospital where kids are sick, and being aware that my camera, even on quiet mode, makes a sound, and just sort of being aware of the situation and the sensitivities. But every time I thought that, I was like, this is an important time, and I have to have the courage to take this picture too. And I've always found that the people in those photos were so grateful that I did too. And going back to the idea of you're documenting history is sometimes you have to be brave.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
My name is Roy Lewis, and I am a photographer for quite a few years. I think you're on target. There are situations where you feel that you shouldn't take this picture. And I was talking to Ms. Gwendolyn Brooks once about a Howard University icon, Sterling Brown, who I was documenting. And I said, I stopped taking pictures of him because I didn't really like, what was happening. And she said to me, and then you maybe use this, Roy, it's still history.
Exactly.
And so you won't take anything that would be embarrassing, but, you still have to keep recording the history.
Right.
And let's face it, that's probably one of our most important aspects, is
Exactly.
recording history. And so what I want to ask you about is this new phenomenon, social media, that everybody, you know, and everybody is a photographer
Right.
syndrome with the phones that are blocking out pictures and
Yeah.
stuff. I mean, I know that the guys at the White House have brought in ladders now to get above them.
Yeah.
And
I
so,
was one of those guys on the ladder.
yeah, I mean, you know,
Sometimes in heels.
I mean, I
That's
was
what I
up
was
there
like,
for the
yeah.
healthcare signing,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I consider one of
Yeah.
my favorite photos of the little guy, the 11-year-old guy, doing the healthcare signing.
Yeah.
Mr. Obama brought him in. I thought that's one of my favorite photos now. But I just wanted your reactions to this new, and I think it's hurting photography. I mean, when I came into photography 50 years ago, it was like we were missionaries a certain kind of way because we were bringing this information to people, you know, life photographers, ebony photographers. And now everybody is doing it, and somehow or another, I think it's downgrading
Yeah.
photography. How do you feel about that?
Well, actually, I've been looking at you because I was like, I know him. I've seen him before.
I've been up
I
there.
think we photographed next to each other at the opening of the African American Museum.
Right.
Yeah. So so thank you for.
Oh, yeah, out there.
Yeah.
Oh.
I was pregnant.
You and I, right, I remember now. Yeah, right. So we were kind of looking out. I was looking out for you. I was looking out for you. Yeah. Now I remember. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. That's right.
I remember.
Yeah. And so the little being is out in the hallway somewhere.
Yeah, I
with
have to go
with
take
my
this
husband.
picture.
Yeah, but yeah, the same thing is when I started at the White House. You know, in those events, like in the East Room, you just took the pictures, but then it started to be like everyone would bring in their cameras
Pads,
and
the
their
pad.
tablets, and at first I tried to like, how do I make a clean scene? And then I just started to use it. It's like, this is here.
It
like,
becomes
I'm just
a part
gonna
of it.
frame with it, you know,
Yeah,
and
right.
some, so like I'm gonna get a detail shot of the person taking a picture
Of the picture, yeah,
you
right,
know?
right.
So again, like going back to that newspaper training is like, how can I make this creative? How can I work with what's there? Because if we're talking about history, that's what happened. Those
Right.
phones were there.
You have to
right?
include it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you brought up an interesting point about like the history and the documentation, because although I couldn't be in the White House right now, there are White House photographers, and I think it's so important that it's being covered, that this historical record is being made so that we can look at
You don't have to agree with it. Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the role in general is really important to be able to document that history. And so social media, how do I feel about it? I mean, I'm like a very private person. I don't use social media much. The only pictures of my daughter are on social media of her toes when she was first born. I think there's one picture. Because I don't know how she feels about social media. Like, and I don't want her to be like 18 and be like, or 16, no, probably 13, right? And be like, I hate you because, you know, there was me in a diaper and then I was like, I got my first tooth and like everyone knows about it and you can't go back and
Erase it.
right. And I mean, for me, it's, you know, like, how do I feel? Everyone's a photographer. I actually feel great about it. Like, I feel like people are tapping into that creative side, you know, and like when young people ask me, especially kids that I go to these schools, like, what's the best camera to get? And it's like, I'm not going to say Canon or Nikon, or because it's like, to be honest, I know they can't afford a camera. And I say, you know, the best thing to do is to cut a piece of like cardboard, make a square, and walk around your neighborhood and work on shooting like, you know, portrait, like tight, punch the microphone, tight, wide, medium, you know, stand on a chair, what does that look like, you know, just using what you have. So I think the phone is like a wonderful way for young people. Actually, that works better. You just have to punch the microphone and it works really good now. Note to AV team. So yeah, I think that the phone is like really freeing people up to be able to document the march. Like, how many pictures do we see from the march from so many different angles? It's also making people accountable. You know, like there are communities that have been able to use their phones to say, hey, look, this is what's happening. If the media's not here, we're documenting it, and this is happening. So I think that there are, you know, positives and negatives about both things. I feel, you know, that there is, a disconnect now because people feel like they're sharing so much, but people don't really talk to each other anymore, and I think that, like, when you ask a question about your play and your notes on your, on your receipts and stuff, it's like, that's so interesting. And I think if you just turn to anyone in this room and say, like, tell me something really interesting about you, and we all get to talking to each other again, I think you'll find yourself much more rewarded than scrolling. But that's just my opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I wanted to piggyback on Roy's question about, I understand what you were saying about how maybe so many people with so many cameras tends to degrade the art of photography in some ways, but maybe we should look at it in a different way. And you touched on it a little bit that, before the advent of social media, there weren't that many outlets for news and information to get out. Social media came along and it democratized media.
And I think we're just seeing trends because now with all the fake news, then people are like, oh my gosh, what did we do to our newspapers, right? I used to be a newspaper photographer. And now that's like, where did our newspapers go? Where were the people that we trust? And so, with every decline, there's going to be something else emerging. And so, and then if we look at any of our history, it's like,
right.
We'll see what.
And maybe Roy and I can remember what it was like before, when large news outlets would be the gatekeepers.
Right.
And
they wouldn't let you in the room.
They wouldn't let you in the room, and subsequently, they got their story out. So now that you look and you see, like, the event that just happened with the Our Lives, students marching, Black Lives Matter, that wouldn't have happened without social media.
Well, look what the phone did to the police.
Right.
I mean, it's now got the police on check. I mean, you see them, and because as soon as the demonstration started, the kids are out there, they got it.
Yeah.
And so it's now become a defense, a way to defend their actions. And so
So I think if we look at anything, it's like there's no clear black and white. It's like it is very much that the phone has done so many wonderful things, but then also has been challenging our communities too. Yeah. So I think.
So I guess my question is, do you see a difference in what you do as a professional news photographer? I guess the answer is maybe going to be yes. And what social media users do? And
I guess I couldn't make a sweeping generalization in that way. Everybody uses it a little differently, and I do like being on Instagram because I do find inspiration there, and actually going to one of the turnaround art schools and seeing the way that the kids were taking pictures and a fresh and new perspective. It's like, even though it's an iPhone, I mean, I think just for me, like when I take a picture with an iPhone, it's sort of the same. Like, I'd frame it the same way as I would with a real camera. So, but to see the pictures hanging in the wall here, the exhibit, printed 20 by 30 and framed, like, that feels like art, And so I think that's the cool thing too, is when you have someone who's, using this as a hobby, and that they can look at this as that they're an artist too. I think that for me, I think that's a wonderful thing.
Someone told me that we're all artists.
We all are artists. Yeah, we all are art, and we all are artists.
Define the expression, define the medium which your art comes through.
Okay, so we have a few more minutes for more questions. Any more questions?
Any more?
And I can come to you with a mic. I don't mind. Also, you can raise your hand if you don't want to.
Anything you want. Yeah.
You have one. Okay.
The book title, yeah, thank you. So photography means to draw with light, and as a photographer, you're always like chasing light. But for me, it represents a really transformative time in my life, where I describe the people in my life that have helped me as these lights that are illuminating a path. And Mrs. Obama was very much one of them, who was teaching me about the person I could be and the life that I wanted to create. So that's chasing light. Thank you.
You're gonna have to use the microphone.
The images are still property of the White House. You don't own the images.
So there's 4 million pictures in the Obama archive, which is pretty incredible. Yes, we're so thankful for our archivist, but yeah, there's 4 million pictures for just the Obama archive, and so there's 150 pictures in the book, and so that edit along with my story is copyrighted in that book. But the pictures that were released are able to be used. They're public domain, so they're able to be used. And I've seen my pictures published in other books. And then the pictures that were unreleased, I got permission from the White House to use those images.
How many? Can you name the 20 countries you went to?
Oh gosh, I don't even know if I can name my 9 brothers and sisters. But I mean, like Cambodia, Japan, Jamaica, Cuba, China, Liberia, Morocco. Gosh. Yes, Russia, Italy, France, England. God, it always gets murky at the end. Gosh, a lot. I think I gave you a little over half, so yeah.
So I have a follow-up question. I think these are countries you've traveled around the world, but the most important question for us at Howard University is tell us about coming to Howard University with the First Lady. We don't care about those countries,
Yeah.
sorry. We want to know about your experience coming to Howard University with the First Lady, which I think is documented in your book.
Yeah, I think I came here maybe 2 or 3 times with the First Lady, and we were always here for Reach Higher, for encouraging young people to get an education, and I think that those are and there is a couple pictures in the book. One picture is as we're leaving in the motorcade, everyone's outside screaming, waving at the motorcade, and it's such a dynamic image. I loved seeing that. But she is very serious when she talks about education, and so I think that I remember just her intensely listening to the students and the challenges that they were facing and that they had to overcome, and yeah, I always loved being here. So when Errol came to the book tour in the Washington Library in October, and we talked about how we could make something happen here. And then I was thinking about, now that I'm done this tour, what you might not know about the photos outside is they're 20 by 30. They're printed the exact same size as we'd print at the White House. We call them jumbos. And we would, the best pictures of the last 2 weeks, we'd hang them so that the people that worked at the White House, who were working so hard, they work so hard to get a goal accomplished, and then they would quickly work on the next thing. And so sometimes they forgot what we did, and so it was having the photos was a wonderful way to remind them of what had been accomplished. And so I thought, when doing this tour, is how can we bring the White House to the people? And so they're framed and printed the exact same way. And now that the tour is over, I wanted to find a home for them, and Howard University seemed like the perfect home. So I'm so glad. Thank you. Yeah.
Final questions? Final question? Okay. So I think my job as a moderator is coming to an end. And personally, I want to thank you very much for coming to Howard and for giving us such visuals. And like the gentleman said, everyone can take a picture, but the stories behind the pictures we don't often hear. So thank you for sharing those stories and getting us closer to the First Lady. We feel like, we were there when you were taking that picture, because we know what happened just before or after the picture. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'll hand over to Mr. Watkins.
Thank you. As a token of our esteem, we'd like to present you with this.
Thank you very much.
And like Amanda had mentioned, 10 Speed Press and Amanda have donated those pictures that are in the main display cases to the university. and they have a great home.
Thank you.
And now that
I know
you've
they
been
do.
here, so do you.
Thank you.
So we're
Oh,
looking forward to
thank
you
so
coming
much.
back.
Thank you.
There are refreshments in the lobby. Barnes & Noble is here. They'll be selling copies of the book. Amanda will sign them. I have got your favorite Sharpie. I have bronze and silver and black.
Thank you.
So this pretty much ends up on, unless, Rhea, do you have any comments? No comments.